believe me when I say that the health tech sector could definitely use more clinical doctors within it. You would truly be surprised how many health tech companies are founded by or run by people with absolutely no medical background. But because in medicine, alternative careers outside of being a clinical doctor are very rarely talked about, these doctors that take an interest in health tech are often left in the dark about what it takes to actually enter the sector or what it's like to be in the sector. And because sometimes people don't have access into how they can break into the health tech sector, they can often just scrap the idea and just continue their training within the clinical path as per usual. So in today's video, I'm going to share 5 practical routes that medical students and doctors can take in order to transition into the health tech sector, or even just experience it to see if it's a field they're interested in going into in the future. I'll also be ranking each of the 5 routes based on these criteria: how easy it is to get started with it, how risky it is, how much time commitment it requires, the depth of experience you'll gain, and whether or not you can do it alongside your clinical job or studies. The first route that you can take, which is actually the one I took to get into the health tech space, is freelancing. Health tech companies, particularly health tech startups, regularly hire freelancers to help them with roles and tasks within the company that may not be appropriate for a full-time employee or a part-time employee. For example, many health tech startups hire freelance medical writers to help them create blogs, articles, patient information leaflets, treatment guides, and more. You don't need to limit yourself to just medical writing, although that is the most common route that doctors and medical students take. I've got a longer list of other freelance roles that you can consider if you're interested in seeing that. It's in the free PDF guide I created, How to Transition from Medicine into Health Tech, and the link for that is in the description below. Personally, I think freelancing is a really fantastic way to break into the health tech sector because you don't need to sacrifice your job or your studies in order to get a taste of what it's like to work in the health tech space. Because you never know, you might actually hate it or despise it. For ease, I would give freelancing a 2 out of 5 because it's pretty easy to get started. You don't really need anything new or anything extra than what you already have, but sometimes obviously it can be difficult to actually find the role itself. For risk, I would give it a 1 out of 5. It's super low risk in my opinion. You can continue with your studies or your clinical job, and if it's not working out for you, you can just quit your contract anytime. For time commitment, I would give this a 2 out of 5 because of course you're going to need to do some work, but you can also dictate the hours that you want to work and which projects you want to take on and which you don't. For experience gained, I would give this a 2 to 3 out of 5 depending on the role that you take, because at the end of the day, you're probably only going to be working with one department or a handful of people. So even though you will get some experience into what it's like to work in health tech, you probably won't get as full of an in-depth experience as you would in a full-time job, for example. And can you do this alongside your clinical job or studies? Yes, absolutely you can. There's nothing stopping you doing this alongside your other work because you can choose your hours and your projects. The next route that you can take is essentially to share your expertise and give advice to health tech companies. And this route can take many different forms. For example, you could do consulting, you could mentor a founder, or you could join the board of a health tech company. Each circumstance is different, and some positions may be paid, like the consulting, and some may be unpaid, like the mentoring. But what they all have in common is that you would essentially be sharing your medical expertise with the company. And the difference between giving advice in this manner and freelancing is that freelancing, you'll actually be diving more deeply in by doing some practical work, whereas with giving advice, you're probably more likely to be on phone calls and meetings, just sharing your opinion and having conversations about the best way to go. When it comes to ease, I would give this a 3 out of 5. And the reason for that is because when you're giving advice, then you usually require a higher level of expertise. So you may need to be further along your career. It may not be as easy for a medical student or a junior doctor to do this, for example. For risk, I gave this a 2 out of 5 because I still think it is pretty low risk. Like I said, you can do it alongside your job and you can dictate your hours, and the schedule is usually pretty flexible. But because you're giving advice, you do want to make sure that you are legally protected, because if, for example, something bad happens and the company turns around and sues you because they say, hey, you gave me this advice, you want to make sure that you're protected on that front. It's just a really normal thing that's done within these consulting contracts anyway. But yeah, just something to think about. The risk is a little bit higher perhaps than just doing freelancing. But in the grand scheme of things, I still think it's pretty low. For time commitment, I gave this a 2 out of 5 because yes, of course, you need to commit some hours to the consulting or the mentoring, but you can still dictate the hours that you do and keep your schedule pretty flexible. For experience gained, I gave this a lower score than the freelancing at 2 out of 5 because I think even though you will get some insight into how a health tech company runs, it's not as hands-on as freelancing, so you may not get the full experience of it because you're not doing any practical work per se, but you still get a taste of what it's like to work within that company. You can do this alongside your clinical job or your studies because because, like I said before, you can choose your hours. The next route that you can take is a little bit more high risk, and that would be to try your hand at actually getting a job within a health tech company. And whilst this is a more risky route, it's truly the only route that will give you the most in-depth experience and realistic experience of what it's like to work in a health tech company. And although it's risky, there are definitely ways for you to mitigate that risk so that you can come back to your medical career if you wish to do so. For example, you can start off by reducing your clinical hours to take a part-time role within the company. Alternatively, you can choose to take a gap year or take a year off work to try a full-time job at a health tech company. And for those of you that are really quite sick of your clinical jobs, or you just really want to try something completely different, this may be a good route for you to go down. But what I will say is that working in health tech companies is not as dreamy as it sounds sometimes. I personally loved it, and I think that there are so many benefits and positive experiences that can come with it. I really enjoyed my experience, but towards the end it did get quite difficult. So I would really urge you to consider, if you've never done something like this before, to see if you can do freelancing or consulting or mentoring or something like that first. Test it out with the health tech field. If it works, great, you can go full speed ahead. If it doesn't, you have the safety net of your medical career behind you that you can return to. For my ratings, I would give the ease of this, or rather the difficulty of this, a 4 out of 5, because this can be quite a difficult route to take. Firstly, it may be difficult to find a part-time role that fits in with the clinical hours that you still want to do. Or it may be hard to find a full-time role that you can actually go into because you may not even be sure what you want to do within the health tech sector. In terms of risk, I would again give this a 4 out of 5 because I think it is quite risky. You're going to have to leave some aspects of your clinical job behind, even if it's just temporary. With time commitment, again, this is a 4 out of 5 because obviously you're going to dedicate a lot of hours and a lot of energy to this new job that you have. But in terms of experience gained, this is a 5 out of 5. This is truly the only way to know how it would be to work within a health tech company, is to actually work within a health tech company. And can you do this alongside your clinical job? Yes and no. Like I said, if you take a part-time role, you may be able to keep some clinical hours, but most of the time it's going to be a no. The next route that you can take is definitely less risky than the last, but it does take a lot of time commitment and energy as well. And that's doing further studies within the field of health tech. For example, you could do a master's or a course or a diploma within a field of health tech, such as health informatics, IT, or bioinformatics. And whilst yes, education is really important and I fully support it, I do think it's very limited in being able to give you the experience of actually working in the health tech sector. But education can, of course, give you a taste of other really important aspects of the sector itself. In terms of ratings, I would give the ease/difficulty a 1 out of 5, because in order to get in, all you really need to do is apply for the course. You're probably qualified enough as a doctor, so you shouldn't have any troubles actually getting started. In terms of risk, this is super low risk in my opinion. I gave it a 1 out of 5 because yes, you're going to need to study, but education is always going to help your career in one way or another. It could add some stress and pressure to your clinical job and obviously might take a bit of a toll on your mental health, but in terms of how risky it is for your career, probably not as risky as some of the other things. For time commitment, I gave this a 3 out of 5 because you will need to study, and if you're doing this alongside your clinical job, it will take up a lot of time. For experience gained, I gave this a 1 out of 5 because honestly, as much as you'll be learning within that course or the masters that you're taking, you just won't get the full feeling of what it's like to work in a health tech company until you work in a health tech company. And can you do this alongside your clinical job or your studies? Again, yes or no for the obvious reasons. You can if you have a clinical job. If you're studying, you might need to take a gap year, or even if you have a clinical job, you may choose to take a gap year, whatever works for you. Now, the fifth and final route is quite possibly the hardest, but also my favorite, and that is you can try your hand at building your own health tech website or app. This route obviously takes up a lot of time and effort, but by building something yourself, you'll very, very quickly learn what it takes to run an actual health tech startup or early stage company. And at first, this idea may seem quite far-fetched and out of grasp, but don't dismiss it so easily, because depending on the idea that you have, sometimes there are ways to implement the idea or test the idea in an easier way than you might think. For example, there are a plethora of no-code tools and AI tools that you can use to help you build something. And if your idea is simple enough, for example, you want to create a website that has information about a particular disease, then You just need that. You just need a website, and there are lots of no-code tools that can help you get there. These days, there are also very cheap ways for you to be able to build and launch a website without having to spend enormous amounts of money. So you can keep it quite low risk to begin with anyway, and see again if you even enjoy the process. But it does require a lot of time and energy, and something that can mitigate that is if you do it together with a friend or a colleague, you can definitely split the tasks and time between you. In general, though, the complexity of this really differs depending on what idea you have and whether or not it's feasible to even try it just by yourself. Usually this is not the route that I would recommend taking first. I would definitely recommend getting some experience within the health tech sector first, because there's a lot that you can learn along the way that can help you if you want to build something by yourself later on. For the ease/difficulty, I would give this a 4 out of 5, because again, it varies really depending on the complexity of your idea. You can definitely do it by yourself, but it takes up a lot of time and effort. And if you are not particularly tech savvy, then this is going to be very, very difficult for you as well. But in more ways than one, it can also be the most rewarding of all the routes I have described before. In terms of risk, I would give this a 3 to 4 out of 5. It really depends on the complexity of your idea, and it may be a low risk thing if you decide to just build a website and test it out and put some information on there. Obviously, it may be risky financially for you or even legally. I don't know what your ideas are, but it can come with a level of risk that the other routes don't have. So it really depends on the idea. I won't go into it more than that. You can probably assess the level of risk depending on the idea that you have. For time commitment, this would be a 5 out of 5. It is going to take up your time for sure. It will really eat into your free time, especially if you're trying to do it alongside a clinical job or your studies. For experience gained, I would give this a 3 to 4 out of 5, because obviously you're going to learn a lot about how to operate a health tech company by actually building it yourself. But there are some things that you just won't be able to learn, because there are some structures and operations and ways of going about work that you can only learn in a big company versus a startup, for example. So working with an established health tech company is the best way for you to gain experience, but this is a close second. And can you do it alongside a clinical job or your studies? Yes and no, again, depending on the complexity of the idea, how much time it takes, how much you want to put into it. But in general, this is probably not the best idea. Like, it does take a lot of time and effort and energy and everything in your soul to be able to build a website or app that you truly care about and you want to grow. So yeah, it depends on the idea, but in general, it's a yes or no. As mentioned before, I do have a free PDF guide that talks about all of these routes in more detail and gives you some other routes that you may consider as well. The link is in the description. It's free to download if you like, and yeah, I hope you like it. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye!